The sound of the front door clicking open was a welcome reprieve from the suffocating silence that had filled our home all evening. Natalie was back from her book club, and even from the hallway, I could hear the unusual lilt in her voice, a melody I hadn't heard in months. She breezed into the living room, a radiant smile illuminating her face like she'd just discovered a new continent. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sparkling, and she seemed younger somehow. She'd always enjoyed her book club, but tonight was different. There was a vibrancy about her that made my gut twist into a tight knot. "Hey, babe," she chirped, leaning in for a quick peck on the cheek. Her skin smelled of vanilla and something else, a musk I didn't recognize. "We had such a great discussion tonight, you wouldn't believe it. We actually stayed an extra hour." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the creeping suspicion that was gnawing at my insides. "Sounds fun," I said, my voice sounding flat even to my own ears. "What was the book?" She pulled a slim paperback from her tote bag, the cover featuring a woman staring longingly into a sunset. It was a trashy romance novel, not the intellectual stuff she usually devoured. "Oh, it's a light read, just a bit of escapism, you know," she said, placing it on the coffee table. "Don't bother with it though, it's really not your thing." She then flitted off to the kitchen, humming a tune, leaving me alone with the book and the unsettling feeling that had been settling in my chest. As if drawn by some invisible force, I reached for the book, the cheap paper cover feeling flimsy in my hand. I flipped it open, expecting to find her usual annotations, her thoughts scrawled in the margins. Instead, I found something else entirely, a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It wasn't a note about the book. It was a letter, the kind filled with whispered promises and illicit desires. Every line dripped with a passion that had been absent from our marriage for what felt like an eternity. "My dearest Natalie," it began, the handwriting unmistakably masculine. "The thought of you tonight kept me from sleeping. Your laughter, the way you looked at me, I can't wait for our next escape." It went on, each word a cruel, precise stab into my heart. It talked of stolen glances, shared secrets, and a rendezvous they had planned at a secluded cabin. She had said she was visiting with her sister for the weekend. My blood ran cold as I read the words, the vibrant colors of the room fading to a dull gray. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for 10 years, was having an affair. The breath left me in a rush as the reality of her betrayal settled upon me, crushing me like a physical weight. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to cry. I just wanted to break something. I held the letter in my trembling hand, the words burning into my memory. The name of the man, James, a brand etched into my soul. I decided against confrontation that night. Instead, I forced a smile, went through our usual routine of dinner followed by TV, each second feeling like an eternity. I could see the fake affection in her eyes when she leaned in to kiss me goodnight. That's when I knew I wouldn't let this pass. I would make her and her lover pay. It would be methodical and it would be painful. Over the next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband, all the while carefully gathering information about James. I found him on social media, a smug-looking man in his late 30s with practiced charm. He was an architect, his online profiles dripping with success and ambition. I found his office building, his home, the places he frequented, and I learned his routine. The more I found out, the colder my rage became. It wasn't a boiling anger but a chilling, methodical one. It was calculating. I also found the cabin address that had been mentioned in the letter. I spent the next weekend working overtime, while in reality, I spent my time packing, preparing for a confrontation. I bought a cheap GoPro camera to gather all the details I needed for later. My plan was taking shape. It was a masterpiece of revenge, carefully constructed, meticulously timed. I drove to the cabin on the following Friday afternoon, arriving well before Natalie and James. I let myself in with a key I had procured from Natalie's purse while she had been asleep. The cabin was rustic, secluded, and frankly pathetic. It was no wonder she had been so happy. It was probably the only attention she had received in months. I set up my hidden cameras and waited. They arrived late, around 10 p.m., laughing and carrying bags of groceries. I watched them through the camera lens, their faces lit with illicit joy, and felt my resolve harden. I waited another hour, letting them settle in, the giggles and whispers growing louder with each passing minute. Then I made my move. I kicked the door open, the force of the impact making the flimsy wood splinter around the lock. The laughter died in their throats as they turned to see me standing there, a dark figure outlined against the dim porch light. Natalie's face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. James, initially defiant, took a step back, his bravado evaporating at the sight of my face. The face she hadn't seen in years, the face she never wanted to see again. "Surprise," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Looks like you two were having a good time." James recovered slightly, attempting to assert himself. "Who are you? Get out of here." I didn't even look at him. My gaze was fixed on Natalie, watching the fear creep into her eyes. A fear that finally, after everything, was directed at me. I walked toward her, each step deliberate. "I just wanted to have a chat with you," I said, my voice still dangerously low. "About the book club." I then pulled the letter out of my pocket and waved it in front of her face. She gasped, but I didn't stop. I dropped it at her feet. Then I turned to James. "And you, architect man, you've been building things that don't belong to you." He tried to act tough, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Listen, man, this is between us." She wasn't happy, so she found someone who was actually capable of making her happy. That's when I moved. I launched myself at him with a force born of betrayal and simmering rage. He was taller, but I was fueled by an anger that turned my punches into sledgehammers. I hit him hard and fast, a brutal flurry of blows that sent him staggering backward, crashing into a table, sending it toppling over, glasses breaking. The fight was fast and brutal. I beat him, each punch a testament to her betrayal. I smashed his smug face in. I saw the fear in his eyes, and I relished it. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for the ferocity of my anger. I had spent the last few weeks watching my life fall apart. My anger finally had an outlet. Natalie, completely horrified, was screaming, but I ignored her. I kept my eyes fixed on James, every punch landing with the satisfying crunch of bone and the wet thud of flesh. I didn't stop until he was on the ground, his face a bloody mess, moaning and gasping for air. I finally stood back, catching my breath, staring down at him with contempt. I turned to Natalie, who was now a crumpled mess of tears. I looked her in the eyes and told her she was the most pathetic person I had ever met. "I could have forgiven a mistake," I told her. "But the coldness, the planning, you're an evil person." She had nothing to say in return. "I guess you really loved that book club, huh?" I said sarcastically. Then, I gathered the footage from my cameras along with the letter and walked out, leaving them both in the wreckage of their tryst. The next morning, I uploaded the footage to a private server, shared a link to both their workplaces and families, and went to my lawyer's office. I had a divorce to finalize. I told my lawyer I wanted everything. The fallout was swift and catastrophic. James's career crumbled overnight. The footage, coupled with the love letter, exposed him for the lying, cheating homewrecker he truly was. His family, humiliated, turned their backs on him. His firm, once a beacon of success, let him go to avoid the scandal. His reputation was in tatters. The world he had built with such smug arrogance came crashing down around him. He had lost everything. Natalie's life followed suit, predictably and painfully. She lost her job after the scandal reached her workplace. Her colleagues whispering behind her back, her boss politely informing her that they could no longer keep her on the team. Her friends disappeared one by one, disgusted by her deception. Even her family, the people she had always relied on, refused to support her. No one could believe how calculated she had been, how cold and deliberate her betrayal was. She became a pariah in the community, whispers and judgment following her wherever she went. She had nowhere to go. I, on the other hand, thrived. The divorce went through faster than I expected. With the evidence I had, Natalie had no ground to stand on. She lost the house, the car, half of our savings, everything she had once built her life around. I made sure she walked away with nothing but regret. But the most satisfying part? I never spoke to her again. I never looked back. For years, I had loved her, trusted her, built a life with her. And in the end, she had thrown it all away for a cheap thrill. But in doing so, she had set me free. Free from the weight of a loveless marriage. Free from the woman who had long since stopped caring. I moved away, started fresh, rebuilt myself from the ground up. The rage, the pain, it all faded in time. But the memory of my revenge? That stayed with me. A reminder that no betrayal goes unanswered. As for Natalie and James, they were nothing more than ghosts of a past life. A story I had once lived, but one I had long since finished. And for the first time in years, I was truly at peace.